guess is an important part of your career. When you went back to WWF at the time for the second time, and they saddled you with the Dean Douglas character, did you think when you first got that character, did you think you could make it work? And how did they explain that to you? Was it how'd it go?
Yeah, it was. It's a great question. I didn't want to leave ECW. ECW was my home. I had spent, I'd broken bones there and poured blood there to help build the place. So I was completely content to stay there. But also I understood that, I was, starting to get to the upper side of the ladder. I knew at some point I was going to start hitting that downside of the ladder. And I still hadn't made the big money in wrestling yet. In a company like ECW that was this big compared to a company like WWE that was gigantic, or WCW that was handing out contracts like candy. I started thinking to myself, it's no longer just about me. It's, I've got kids coming into the world. I've got a mortgage to pay. I've got a wife to take care of who likes to spend money. And, and so I started looking at the realistic side of that. Maybe it's time that I start looking at capitalizing on what I've built in my career.
Got to.
And they came along and they offered, in the meetings they were extraordinarily complimentary. Hey, we're going to this and that, and we're going to offer you the whole world in a bag of chips. And but there was something in the back of my mind that just didn't quite feel right. I didn't want to leave ECW, but I also just didn't feel right about going there. There was nothing that I can point to and say, well, this was a red flag or that was a red flag. It's just I didn't want to go there. And after several trips up, I think 5 or 6 trips up, I finally took my wife on one of the trips. She didn't know the first thing about the professional side of this or the business side of our sport, but I wanted to use her as the good cop and bad cop. So I told her on the plane up, listen, if he asks you any questions, because she was not a very assertive person, I said, if he asks you any questions, asks you your opinion, you look him in the eye, and I don't care what you're thinking, what you want to say, look him in the eye and tell him exactly what your thoughts are.
Wow.
And it was the only time in my relationship with Carla that I ever saw her do that. He said, Carla, I'm sure, you must have some concerns. And she looked him in the eye and she said, my husband teaches school 5 days a week and loves that job. He works for Extreme Championship Wrestling, the only company that has utilized his talents fully. He worked for you once before. He's worked for WCW and NWA, and nobody's ever capitalized on his talent like ECW has. And he's at home with me 5 nights a week, in bed with me 5 nights a week. What can you possibly offer my husband to walk away from all that?
She said this directly to Vince McMahon.
Vince.
Wow.
And I thought, wow, what a girl, that's a great. And I'll never forget, he leaned across the table. Vince doesn't have a desk, he has a table.
Okay.
Big square table, and the most gaudy. He makes Elvis Presley look tasteful. But he leaned across and he patted her hand. He stroked her hand like this, and he said, Carter, you have my word as a gentleman. I'm going to make your husband a very wealthy man. Well, at that point, I slid in. I said, well, Vince, I'm sure you and I have different definitions of the word wealthy. What are we talking about? And, well, this is before, we don't offer guaranteed contracts here, pal, but it's not uncommon that we're going to, for somebody in your position, that we're about to put you in to make a minimum of $350,000 to $550,000 a year.
Whew.
So I still didn't jump at that. I left, went home, and I called Ricky Steamboat, Sherry Martel, Rick Rude, Kurt Hennig, Mike Hagstrand and Joe Laurinaitis from the Road Warriors. Literally everybody that had worked in a top spot up there.
Smart.
Called every one of them, and they all told me the same thing. That's exactly what he told us, told me, and I got rich. So that was when I signed the contract. And 4 months into my stint, well, first of all, with the character itself, I thought the character had a ton of possibilities.
Especially with you being a teacher. Is that why he came up with that, or did you come up with that?
No, they came up with that, and I guess their idea was to make it a true extension of something in our past. And the idea for the character was, Vince was, if you go back and watch the tapes at that time, even Bret Hart, the best is, was, never will be, was not great binding the leg except on the finish. There were little things like that where the guys fall into this comfort zone and sort of forget the ABCs of our business. He wanted to use the Dean character as a way to sort of tongue-in-cheek, in a comical way, to point out to the guys, look, you're screwing up. Tighten this up.
Like when you were doing the grades and stuff.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the grades, initially, when he gave me the idea for the grades, we talked about that. I said I didn't want to go in there and start doing some cornball grades. I wanted it to be legit grades, A, B, C, D, F. And he promised me that I could do that. He went so far as to give me his home phone number, and he said, Shane, if there's ever anything, I don't care if it's the middle of the night, there's something you don't feel comfortable with, you feel free to call me immediately. Well, I tried that one time. and when I called him at home, it was about the powder blue outfit that they put me in. I'd come from, at the time in 96 when I went in there, I came off of ECW as literally the hottest heel in the industry. Renowned for my promos, renowned for my in-ring work, and renowned for building a company from scratch. So when I got there and I saw this powder blue outfit, I thought, well, what is it with Vince and heels and powder blue? Because he had Louis Piccoli in blue, he had the Body Donnas, Chris Candido and Sonny, in powder blue, and then he put me in. They must have got like a run, like a cheap rate on. Like some
do it with the Bam Bam too, man. He had the flames already. He could have put everybody in.
Right. So I called him at home and I said, Vince, this outfit just looks ridiculous. You know, the big sequined exclamation point. I said, this looks like a cartoon character. I hate it. He goes, well. Okay, I appreciate that, but I like it, so we're going to keep it that way. So I realized that, you can call him at home anytime you want, and he's going to tell you to go pound salt. Nothing's changing anyway. So, but I thought the character had a world of possibility, except when I got there. And one day we were in the studio shooting vignette after vignette after it was up there for a Sunday.
Okay.
Did 6 or 7 of them, and some of them took multiple takes because they wanted different camera shots or whatever. It was 7, 8 hours in the studio doing the same vignettes over and over again. And by the time I hit the last one, he didn't allow me to speak in with inflection, which my character was renowned for, and passion in my speeches. He explained to me that in 8th grade, he had a teacher that spoke in a monotone voice, and it drove him nuts. And I said, well, Vince, here's the difference. In 8th grade, you were captive in that classroom. You couldn't get up and walk out, and you couldn't change the channel. On television now, I know I'm a channel surfer. I said, when people get to the point where they realize that I'm speaking in that, here's that boring guy again, they're not going to care what I have to say. They're going to flip away. And I knew that there was something that just wasn't adding up about that character. And then he started with the cornball grades, TT for terrible twosome, and UF for utter failure, and just stuff like that, just ridiculous and cartoonish. Exactly what I think is wrong with the business today. And I knew it was time to get out of there. But the last one we did that day, and this is where it really sealed the deal to me, no pun intended, but the exclamation point at the end of that day was. On the last one we did, I said, I was so bored with it. I said, Vince, can I do that last one again? I'll say the exact same verbiage, same grade, make the same points on the in-ring action, but just do a little different delivery. He said, sure. So he goes ahead. Now, the room is full of Michael Hayes was in there, who's a pretty good stick guy.
Oh, yeah.
Stan Lane, Jim Ross, 2 or 3 makeup girls and sound techs and cameramen, and there was probably 12, 15 people.
And all these guys like Hazel have to know who you are and know what you can do.
Oh, sure. I've known Michael and Stan since I was a kid in the business, and so we get done with his way, and I do the second way with the inflection and the pounding my fist on the podium and laughing and scratching the blackboard. And right as I get done, he gets called out of the room on a phone call. So I poll everybody in the room. Which way did you think was, honestly, please give me the feedback. And every single person in that room wasn't just like, close, but I liked your way better. Everybody in that room went, oh, man, that last way you did was a million times better than Vince's way. 10 minutes later, Vince comes back in with his cup of coffee and his glasses down on the tip of his nose, and he leans against the desk. I said, well, Vince, what'd you think? He said, well, I can appreciate what you're trying to do, but I like my way better. What's everybody else think? And every single person in that room went, we agree with you, Vince. We were just telling them we thought your way was better. And I looked around that room and I thought, wow, am I in the Bizarro world or something? Wow. Like a Twilight Zone episode? And I knew right there, it was time to get the heck out of there. Because if, I don't care who you are, nobody's right all the time. To me, when you have a room full of talent like that, not that we're always right, but at least what we bring to the table is worth listening to.
See if it sticks.
Absolutely.
Throw it to the wall.
It was time to get out of there.
Well, again, I got a couple more things. I'll let you go because this is going on forever. I apologize,
sure.
because you've done
great questions.
You've done so much. I've always wondered this. Just concentrating on your Dean Douglas run one more time. In your house, when they did the whole forfeit the title thing. I know this is probably going to go for another half an hour when I bring this up. The whole forfeit the title thing. First of all, it's a small thing that I love, but when they were relinquishing the title, you grabbed it, and I thought that was great. But then when you went on to face Scott Hall, Razor Ramon at the time, I noticed during the finish you stuck your leg out of the ring. Now, was that predetermined you were going to do that, or was that a thing that you did on your own to make a statement?
Predetermined. When Vince came to me, and it's always funny, I love telling the story because when Vince talks about the World Wrestling Federation at that point, it's always, we here in the World Wrestling Federation, as if it's like a parallel universe or something, like the laws of physics don't apply there. And he said, we believe the fans should always go home happy. And I said, well, Vince, with all due respect, that's where you and I disagree. Because I believe in sending the fans home ticked off once in a while so they want to come back to pay to see you get your butt kicked. And so he told me that Shawn was forfeiting the title. which I knew was, it would take too long to go into the whole thing. He was fine. He hadn't been beaten up like they said he was beaten up. He was fine. The makeup girls beat him up like that. He had run his mouth, when I was in Germany the 3 weeks prior, he had run his mouth in the dressing room saying that he was going to embarrass me on national television. And I said to Davey Boy Smith, rest his soul, one of my best friends in the business, but he was a great ribber and loved to stir the pot. Yeah. And I said, and Davey had told me that, and I said, well, if he tries to embarrass me on national TV, I'll stretch his rear end. And I didn't say rear end. And I said, so I almost immediately, within hours, I get the phone call that the finish has been changed, that Shawn has had a relapse of his concussion and can't perform. So he ran his mouth, put himself in a situation.
What caused him to run his mouth? He's just running, or was there something that you had a problem?
That's Shawn. You know, Shawn thinks that, you know, he's afraid of his own shadow. And not that I'm the toughest guy in the world, but, you know, I've always been very passionate about it. And if you have a problem with me, we can just as easily go outside to settle it, or we can settle it like professionals. That really doesn't matter to me. But if you go out and you make a statement in front of the dressing room that you're going to embarrass me, then you can expect there to be a response to that. So when he forfeited the belt to me, I told Vince before, and I said, this is the worst thing you can do, because we always go out and we say, I'll kill for this belt. I'll spill my blood for this belt. But unless I got a knock on the head, I'll just hand it to you. And I said, wait for him to be healthy to come back so he can, because the whole idea was the replay of the Ultimate Warrior and Rick Rude angle. I would beat him for the Intercontinental belt, and the next year at WrestleMania, he'd beat me with chin music. And, you know, let's face it, Shawn is probably the greatest in-ring performer this business has ever seen. And again, as a heel, I could certainly have pulled mine to the bargain. I think that had he been on the page and willing to work, he and I could have done some magical things in the ring. But he didn't want to. He and the Clique felt that belt was theirs, and they had the right to decide, we don't like you, so you don't get it, but you're okay. This guy we're going to keep it with him. And it wasn't just me. It was me, Dustin Rhodes, and it went right down the list after I left. And so for me, that was my way of when I snatched the belt from him, it was like to show him that my character could overshadow his character at any day of the week. And then when they dropped the belt to Razor right afterwards, Vince said to me, whatever finish you want to do. And I said, well, I think we ought to, first of all, I think it's terrible to just take the belt. The fans are savvy enough to know that if you're taking it from him and handed it to me and then I lose it to him, he didn't want to lose to him. Shawn didn't want to lose to Razor, which is what they should have done. And so I told him, I said, I just think it's garbage to what you're doing, but if that's what you want to do, then let's get some longevity out of it and give it some oomph so that we can draw money with it afterwards. As I'm getting pinned, I slide my foot under the bottom rope, which technically should have broken the count.
I was a little kid and I knew that. And I was like, he's brilliant for doing this.
Right.
And I was so mad.
And they never made mention of it.
Nope. That's why I thought you did it on your own.
Right. No, that was my finish I gave to them. But when I realized they didn't comment on it, I knew that they weren't doing anything with it. You know. So it's just, look, they've been very successful for a long run up there and made a lot of money. But again, when you look at the numbers across the board, their ratings are down, their stock numbers are down. They can't sell out WrestleMania. The wrestlers are dying to get out of there. They're miserable being there, and the fans aren't content with the product, or the ratings would be up from there. So on every measurement, this gigantic entity has lost its steam. It's lost its mojo, or using Shawn's vernacular, they've lost their smile.
Hey, he's got it. That was good. That's going to get a lot of comments about you. They have, I mean, that's your opinion. Some people would, I mean, you might get other fans. Again, Extreme Reunion is something I think I think take in.
It's an acquired taste.
And they can see if they like it, and they may. I mean, I liked it when I was a little kid. I remember the first time I saw it, ECW, actually TWA at the time, I was like, because I was used to the big blue bars in the cage and all. Sure. And then I saw somebody get whacked with a chair. And then I was like, oh, my God, this is – because I didn't know any of that at the time. Yes. So it's a whole different ballgame. And I'm pretty excited about Extreme Reunion.